Jump in the Discord, Destiny. We'll get you in here.
I'll drag you in here. By the way,
do you want?
by the way, like the problem with siloing all of these issues, like will stock dividend, will blocking stock buybacks solve inequality? Of course not. But it's part of a larger program.
That's Praxis.
Hey, that was very nice of you. Thanks for gifting Destiny a sub. If I had any emotes, that would be useful. I don't know how to drag people in. I'm a fucking boomer. You guys do
It's
it.
literally you grab them and you drag them.
Okay, Destiny, hold on.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah,
he's here.
I don't.
There he is.
All right. Do you want to shrink the chat down a little bit so it's just you two, or?
I mean,
I don't care. I just had a couple of really basic questions.
Sure,
okay?
sure.
Now I'm 100% power level focused on this conversation. Okay. Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Do you acknowledge, or do you think that in a perfect world, if all the workers are making a lot of money, do you think stock buybacks would be okay?
I mean, I would have to examine the evidence. I still think that they accelerate inequality and they're a tax dodge. So I would probably prefer them not to take place because they add all sorts of problems.
So do you think that everything in society that causes inequality should be eradicated?
Okay, so this is a really good question. Have you read Rawls before?
I'm familiar with him, Theory of Justice Meme.
Yeah, basically like, you know, the difference principle and like the justifications for inequality. Like, do you buy into any of that?
I don't know enough about it to know if I do or
Basically,
not,
the principle is inequality is justified in so much as it helps the least off person. So like we pay doctors more because ultimately in our society that will result in more doctors being available and more care for the least. Like from a justice point of view, it's okay to pay some people a little bit more or more than others if it results in like more gains for everybody in society.
Okay.
So I'm okay with inequality in so much as it helps the worst off in our society.
So then are you not okay with people that like own capital or?
I would say that, okay, you're asking me whether or not I believe in the private ownership of the means of production in any capacity?
Well, because what I'm saying, what I'm getting at is like, I'm trying to find out what your issue is with stock buybacks. And it sounds like what you're saying is you want to abolish capitalism. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. If that's the thing, then
no,
we should just focus on that.
That's not what I'm saying. Well, I mean, I'll explain to you my point of view. And I would appreciate if you just take it as this is my actual view and I'm not LARPing and I'm not hiding my power level. Can we agree to that?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay,
sure, go for it.
so
I mean, whatever you say, I'm just treating it as what you say.
Yeah, I consider myself to be a social democrat on policy points of view, but I am philosophically and economically interested in a transition to democratic socialism where practicable, but only if, in a humble fashion, you know what I mean? So we experiment with
then
things.
Why not just be a democratic socialist? Why SOCDEMs are characterized by their support for liberalization and capitalism? Like,
I don't know if I would agree with that. It depends on what period of time you're talking about, but
I'm talking about today. I don't
like
know why we're
SOCDEMs,
talking about SOCDEMs 100 years ago, but SOCDEMs today are liberals that generally work within capitalism. They're not trying to abolish capitalism.
Well, I mean,
like, why not just be a democratic socialist? I'm not trying to nail you in it.
I mean, it's like the distinction. Socialist. It's like the distinct. I mean, like, you know, the question of like, if you like, Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, but his policies are social democratic.
Bernie Sanders is almost for sure a SOCDEM, or I've never heard anything that seems.
But he calls himself a democratic socialist. Do you see?
Yeah, he also calls himself like a socialist, but I don't know why the fuck he says that.
But I guess you could say I'm very similar to Bernie in my policy point of view, but I'm okay with the horizon of experimenting with more like worker-owned aspects of production, and I tend to think that private capital ownership, you know, is fine, but there are a lot of interests that are being overawed by the accumulation of power and the accumulation of capital in too few hands, if that makes sense. So
okay, so then back to my other
fundamentally, the reason why I oppose stock buybacks is because I feel like they create moral hazard and that they're a tax dodge. And if we change the law that when a stock buyback takes place, everybody has a taxable event who owns the stock, I'd be fine with it. Like if we make
a perfect world, wait. So in a perfect world, like in a world where things are functioning as they should and workers are making money on all this shit, and stock buybacks are tax and rates, you'd be okay with stock buybacks.
But that's not the world we live in. But yeah, sure. But yeah.
Then what's your problem with stock buybacks?
Because we don't live in the perfect world. That's
okay,
that's my
but in
problem.
order to get to a more perfect world, we
okay.
usually incrementally work our way there.
Sure.
Why would you want to?
So,
why do you want to get rid of stock buybacks? Why not just increase the taxes?
Oh my God. Okay, so this is a great point. I was talking to my stream about this before we talked, and it's called the theory of the second best. And economist Richard Libsey, I have it up on my stream, the Wikipedia page, and Kevin Lancaster. They talked about how if you have problems in an economic, like there's market failures in one aspect of the economy, and you can't address that market failure directly, you could have a second best policy. So like, for example, like you say, Mike, in the perfect world where we had perfect laws, stock buybacks wouldn't be that big of a problem. Do you agree? And I would say probably sure. But the problem is we don't live in that world. We live in a world where there's tax advantages and there's mispricing and there's moral hazard.
I understand what you're saying.
So
sure. So your second best thing only works, okay? Because what it essentially states is that the primary position is too hard to achieve, so you go for the second best, right?
Sure.
The problem here, though, is that
well, not necessarily, but go on.
The problem is that your primary here is harder to achieve than your second best.
Why?
It would
it's just a rule change.
Because it would be way easier to change the rules on, say, capital gains taxes and probably be more popular with people than it would be to make stock buybacks illegal.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends. Like, if it's just a regulatory rule change in the SEC, all you need is a president. Whereas if you're passing a law, then you need to have both houses, then you need to shepherd a law through both houses, and then you have to sign it. And that's probably more difficult than like changing a rule, right?
But the problem with only changing the rule on the stock buybacks, let's say that I grant you that, which I don't even think I would, but let's say that I grant you that and I say, okay, we can get stock buybacks banned. Everything would just shift to dividends and you'd be right back at square one.
But
would you get dividends banned too?
Well, hold on, but dividends are not the same, which we established. Like you said, you agreed with me that there's a taxable event that takes place.
So your primary problem with stock buybacks was that stock buybacks serve to increase inequality by returning more money to capital owners. Dividends accomplish the exact same thing.
Except they don't, because again, like there's a tax advantage.
Dividends are taxed slightly higher, but they still accomplish the exact same thing. It is returning money to people that are capital owners.
And it doesn't have the element of, again, like the possibility of manipulation, moral hazard, all those things.
You can manipulate a stock and do anything you want to pay back a bigger dividend, just the same way that you could for a stock buyback. And all the same theoretical moral hazards exist with a dividend that it does with a stock buyback. If it doesn't, I would love for you to try to show me an example of where one could happen and one couldn't.
Well, like, for example, if you time a sale based around the artificial demand that occurs during the actual process of buying it back. I mean, like this.
What if you get an artificial demand that raises a bunch of money for a company and then you pay out a huge amount of dividends and then you leave the company? You could create the same type of problem if this theoretically could happen, which I don't think the SEC would allow it to happen.
Well, first of all, like,
examples
the
of
SEC
happening.
right now is at the lowest white-collar crime, prosecutions the last 20 years because Donald Trump controls the presidency. And so the people he puts in place to head the SEC turn their eyes away from manipulation, insider trading, fraud, like all that stuff. The enforcement is going down right now. And like there's
I don't know if that's true. I do know that the SEC is an independent agency in the U.S. federal government. Like the president doesn't tell the SEC what
he
to do.
Appoints
like
people. There are political
just like
appointees.
The DOJ is.
There's political appointees.
And you appoint the head of the DOJ as well, but that doesn't mean the FBI and the CIA and all these people are like taking orders from the president just because you appoint the head guy.
I mean, it's more complicated. Like again, it's very complicated. Like you're right in the sense that these agencies are independent, but when you put political appointees are often in the most supervisory and senior position. And so they can set policy about what can be prioritized and what isn't. And they can deny, many times they could actually decline prosecutions and do all sorts of stuff. Not to get too much in the weeds. This is why
we're not getting in the weeds, but what you're saying is really dangerous.
It's not dangerous, it's fact. That's why Donald Trump being president is such a problem.
So the danger of so this is why Donald Trump being president isn't as big a problem as it could be. It's because we do have independent institutions in the United States that do stand on their own, right? This is why when Trump says the only reason the FBI is investigating me for this Russian bullshit is because Obama made it happen, that's not true. As the president, you do have the ability to appoint certain people, the head of the DOJ, the head of the FBI, whatever. You can make these appointments, but these agencies are still independent agencies that stand on their own and answer to their own internal leadership.
But here's the thing. Two things. First of all, there is political appointees, and they are dependent upon the president that picks them. They serve at his pleasure. And then you have the permanent bureaucracy that you're talking about. For the most part, we try to operate in a continuous manner without political disruption, and that are, in a sense, somewhat independent. But there was just a story recently about how in the State Department, they are going after Democratic people who work in the State Department. Like the political appointees are targeting for harassment and career attack people that are Democrats. Like the independence of these agencies is part of the strength of our system, but it's also they're checked by political appointees. There isn't complete independence. That's why the EPA administrator is like a fucking coal lobbyist now. Do you think that makes no difference?
It might make a slight difference, but I don't think it makes the entire...
What? Significant difference. Like they did a thing about like the dumping of like coal ash into rivers and shit. And there's all sorts of differences. They stripped like climate change from the website and stuff. I mean, like, no, I see what you're saying. Like, we want to have...
Well, no, because you're doing the same thing that Trump does, except now it's just happening from the other side.
Which is what?
You're saying that all of our institutions are meaningless, they have no power, and the president is basically an authoritarian dictator whose ability to appoint people can completely compromise an entire organization. You're saying that like large swaths of EPA rulings can become defunct at just the president's will, or that the SEC isn't prosecuting white-collar crime because Trump is saying so. These are highly conspiratorial claims.
Okay, first of all, that's not what I said.
Well, of course, against Obama.
Destiny, if I said that, it would be conspiratorial, but I didn't. I said that they are not totally independent and that political appointees can... exert tremendous pressure. And I brought up multiple points. Wait, hold on. Let me finish.
Oh my God.
I brought up multiple points in support of what I was saying with the EPA administrator and the coal ash. I brought up the white collar crime prosecutions going down. You think it's a coincidence?
No, I think there's some push, but it's not like these were wholly like institutions that were dedicated to the prosecution of white collar crime and then Trump changed everything, right? An appointee might be able to shift something slightly in one direction or another, but like what you're doing is you're giving me a conspiratorial claim and then I'm pushing back on you and saying, well, no, I'm not saying this happens all the time. You're retreating it into a meaningless statement where you're saying, well, I'm saying they have some influence or some of the time. It's like, well, what am I saying?
No, I didn't say, by the way, I grounded it in concrete examples. I don't think I'm doing anything that you're saying. Chat, anybody, feel free to say.
Yeah, but what are you saying beforehand that these institutions, that the EPA was like a prime beacon of prosecuting people for environmental crimes, or that the SEC was keeping like all white collar crime like under check under Obama or whatever?
I would say Obama didn't go nearly far enough. That's what I would say.
Okay, so then it sounds to me like the problems are with these institutions themselves, not just that the president is exercising like sole control over these institutions.
Well, like, by the way, so your chat wanted examples of the buyback stuff, and it's bad for the company. I think GE is facing like massive accounting irregularities, and they spent $24 billion in buybacks, and it hurt the company tremendously. That was just an example. But no, wait. So I'm not really sure I follow your point. Are you saying that these are independent agencies and that I'm undermining them by saying that the president is important in their administration?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're doing it intentionally or not. I'm going to assume not because I try to assume the best. But what you do when you say these types of things is you foster this idea that all American institutions are failing and that the government is a totalitarian dictator. This is similar rhetoric. And I understand this is maybe like a big populist talking point, and maybe because you're like Bernie Sanders, you fall in that camp. But there's a really big talking point with Trump where he constantly talks about like the deep state, right? It's the same type of thing, that all of these institutions are compromised because of prior political appointments and none of them stand on their own. You're making like a deep state argument, which I think is incredibly damaging and undermines.
I don't think I am.
But you are. That's exactly what you're saying. You're saying that the president, through his own appointments, can like dramatically shift the policies or whatever of some of these institutions.
Well, self-evidently,
or you can back it up and say he can have a slight impact, in which case your statements don't really carry much weight then.
Okay, first of all, that's, again, you're creating a false dichotomy. I can say, first of all, I'm not saying that there's some sort of deep state necessarily that is undermining democracy. Well, first of all, wait a minute. Let's step back. Do you believe that these agencies should be accountable to democratic control?
Like Democratic Party or like...
I mean elections. Like if the EPA is doing something and 100% of people come out and vote against it, should that be blocked? Or should the EPA be independent from democracy altogether?
Fuck, I'm not ready. I would have to think about this a lot. I'm not sure. So some agencies I think should stand independent of like public approval. So for instance, like I don't think our monetary policy in the Federal Reserve, I don't think that should be subject to like referendums or people in Congress. I mean, for something like the EPA, I mean, I would imagine that like if you wanted to check something the EPA was doing, the way to do that would be like through legislation passed through Congress. No?
So like right now, I'm pulling up on the stream. It said Trump EPA rolls back Obama era coal ash regulations, and it's talking about how the Trump administration announced Wednesday that it is relaxing rules for the disposal of spent coal used to fuel hundreds of power plants. And so this is due to the fact that the EPA administrator, Andrew Wheeler, was a former coal lobbyist. So he's going in and he's changing the rules that he can in a way that is most advantageous to the coal industry. Is that conspiratorial, or do you think that makes sense?
Let me read this article. Can you link it to me?
Sure. Now I'll DM it to you. I'm surprised to hear you think that you think I'm being conspiratorial here. I think this is just how the government.
Well, no, because it's like
how it works.
I think it's really dangerous. I hate populism, whether it's on the left or the right.
I don't know what you mean when you say populism.
Populism is the idea that you get these political figures that come out and try to paint every single other person as like a compromised enemy. So Trump does it and Bernie Sanders does it, where the idea is you basically say, I'm going to represent your interests and everyone else is against you. Everyone in government is, all the elites are against you, the upper class is against you, and I'm the only one that can help you. Trump did it with the drain the swamp thing.
That seems more like demagoguery than it does populism, but
it's a type of demagoguery, but that is populism. Populism is the idea of identifying like everyone else as like enemies.
Well, I mean, what about arguing that populism is a rejection of elite institutions that have been corrupted via an oligarchy?
Well, sure. When you're a populist, though, you say that every institution has been corrupted. I mean, it's begging the question, right? Yeah, of course. A populist is going to say, well, I'm only identifying the corrupt institutions, but to a populist, every institution is corrupted.
I don't know that that's the definition of populist as it's understood.
So populists typically present, quote unquote, the elite as compromising the political, economic, cultural, and media establishment, depicted as a homogenous entity and accused of placing their own interests and often the interests of other people, such as large corporations, foreign countries, or immigrants, above the interests of, quote unquote, the people. This is populism 101. Yeah, it's like 100%.
Okay, according to just like a dictionary definition, I hate to do this, but it says political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups.
Yep, which is exactly what Trump and Bernie do. It's the same
so,
type of
I mean,
thing.
I guess you could say that they're similar, but then again, you look at what they actually do in their policies, and Trump goes and picks a coal lobbyist. Do you say that a coal?
That's because Trump is a populist.
Would you say he's a fake populist? Would you say he's a fake populist or a real populist?
No, please. Okay. You can have populists on the left and you can have populists on the right. Trump is very clearly a right-leaning populist that borderlines on fascism. Bernie is very clearly a left-leaning populist. Populism doesn't imply policies. It's just like kind of how you, it's like a
rhetorical strategy.
It's kind of like your political rhetoric, basically.
Okay, fine. But there's nothing there. If it's just a rhetorical strategy, there's nothing dangerous about a rhetorical strategy necessarily.
Well, there are plenty of things that can be dangerous about certain rhetorical strategies.
Unless that rhetorical strategy results in objective behavior. Right. So
the danger that I have with populism is that populism often shows you enemies where there are none, and it undermines institutions that you might have built that are essential in maintaining your democracy. So for instance, when I argue with conservatives and they tell me that all of liberal academia has gotten together and faked climate change science, that's a form of populism that is dangerous to my existence. Or when I argue with people on the left that say that all of economics has come together to conspire against Marx, that's a dangerous proposition that undermines our understanding of the economy.
That's a ridiculous statement. And by the way, like most economists have incorporated a lot of Marx's critiques into the economic science. Like there are Marxists who are doctrinaire Marxists, but a lot like Keynesianism and a lot of these other schools of economics have incorporated a lot of the critiques. Like Marx was largely a scholar. You know, he was making critiques
of philosopher, and economic philosophy. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, you can incorporate these critiques, sure. But like, there are a lot of people when I argue with them who will just shun aside everything I say. It's like, well, of course your studies say that NAFTA was good for the economy. All of the economists are rigged against the people, and it's like, okay, well, this is the same type of like undermining.
Sure, that would be ridiculous. I would never do that. I would never do that.
Well, that's good if you don't do it. But you're kind of doing it right now with the independence of our institutions. The independence.
No,
I'm
not. I'm pointing out that the EPA, the political appointees have a lot of power over the I mean, you're the one making a frankly extreme position, which is that these agencies are independent of the political appointees set to govern them.
I don't think they're entirely independent. I just don't think you're going to see a dramatic shift. So, for instance,
I just pointed to a dramatic shift on coal ash regulations, and that's
you didn't point to a dramatic shift. Okay,
that is dramatic.
Let's say
how is that not dramatic?
Really? How do you know what their policy was before? Do you think that that's why I'm asking you? Do you think these things were beacons of like environmental protections under Obama, and Trump made them horrible, or were they already like pretty horrible? They were probably already like pretty shit.
If they're so shit, then you agree with Bernie. But
they're not. But they're not. No. They're not shit because a totalitarian president is dictating their shittiness. They're shit because half the American population doesn't believe, for instance, that climate change is real. It's a problem of democracy, not a problem of a totalitarian dictator that's able to dictate policy via appointment.
So this is a chicken and an egg type situation. Have you read the Powell memo? Do you know about like Fox News and like all that, the founding of it? Roger Ailes.
That it's supposed to serve as like an arm to the Republican Party to drive up support for them. What about it?
So like basically the Powell memo, do you know who Powell was?
Colin Powell?
No, not Colin Powell. Okay, he's a Supreme. I'm sorry. This is okay, so it might seem more conspiratorial, but this is all pretty well established stuff. And if you've never heard it before, I understand. I would encourage you to read more. But basically the Powell was a former Supreme Court justice. I believe he was appointed by Nixon. And he wrote a memo to prior to being appointed to a lot of senior GOP figures with Roger Ailes, who went on to become president of Fox News. And he said that that the right wing was losing academia, it was losing the media, and they needed to create alternate sources of information, and they needed to politicize business owners, because in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, a lot of business owners were apolitical, right? And they said that we've got to create a chamber of commerce. We've got to get business owners more involved in politics. We've got to create alternate sources of information, our own newspapers, our own networks. And they talk about how they're going and to take over academia, what their strategies for how they were going to get it done. And the Powell memo is one of the most, it's like the Southern strategy. I'm sure you've heard of that, right? These were deliberate decisions made to shape public opinion. And they created Fox News, and I think you would agree with me that Fox News is the leading purveyor of falsehoods and misinformation in our society, and it shapes a lot of the Republican Party's like political positions, right?
Okay.
So like all that is the context that we're operating in. Is that there is you could say it's a right wing. I mean, Hillary Clinton said it was a vast right wing conspiracy. Is Hillary Clinton a conspiracy theorist too?
Yeah, I understand. Wait, real quick. I just wanted to so just to clarify on this one example you gave, because I read this article. So Trump's EPA is not rolling back a big Obama-era coal ash regulation like this headline states. If you read the article, basically what they're doing is Obama had set some timetable for people to stop dumping coal into certain types of water areas because of fears that it might leak into groundwater sources. He wanted that done by April of, I think, 2019. And Trump is basically giving them 18 more months to do it.
That's right. So that's a significant change.
Is it?
Yes, because it was supposed to be rolled back. Part of this is...
Let's say, okay, so I'm just asking because I don't know. Let's say this is something that they've been doing for 80 years, and now they've got a year and a half more to do it. Is that really that significant of a change?
Well, if the difference is you have to stop versus you don't have to stop, I would say that's a pretty significant change, right?
Sure, but if you've been doing something for 40 or 50 years, and now you have 18 months more to do it because maybe you'll save, the EPA states that the relaxed rules will save affected utility companies 28 to 31 million a year in regulatory costs. Like... I don't know.
Do you think in 18 months it's going to, and they're going to kick in, or are they going to extend again?
I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens in 18 months, huh?
Well, that's the problem, right? Because like this is a policy, and would you agree that Administrator Wheeler, that he's a coal lobbyist? He comes in, and this is an old example. You just wanted an example, so I brought one up. He immediately goes in, and the first thing he does is prevents this coal industry regulation from taking place. And would you agree that coal power is probably a existential threat to humanity at this point?
Yeah.
So we need to get rid of it as quickly as possible.
Maybe. That's a much more complicated question because you've got a lot of different interests here.
Well, the question is, okay, so like, do you accept the IPCC's conclusions about the effects of catastrophic climate change?
Sure.
Okay, so if we agree that the IPCC's conclusions of catastrophic climate change, and we want to keep our parts per million of carbon dioxide below a certain point by a certain date, the things that we've got to eliminate is fossil fuel energy production as quickly as possible. As quickly as practical. Now, obviously, we don't want to cause economic turmoil and a collapse of the world economy, so we have to balance unwinding fossil fuels with the needs of the climate.
Yeah, of course.
So when Barack Obama was creating, and by the way, this is not just CO2, this is like literal fucking ash being dumped into like unprotected ponds and stuff and causing like leakage and environmental damage. When we create these rules, what we're doing is disincentivizing the use of coal plants, which we need to do. And this is something that Trump is rolling back because he thinks that climate change is a Chinese hoax. And the reason why this took place is because he appointed a coal lobbyist. So my point simply was that the EPA is not fully independent from the president. There are elements of it that are independent and they're important, but they're under attack by the political appointees. I don't think that's conspiratorial at all. And I use this as a clarifying example of here's how political appointees can change rules. And you could say, Mike, it's not that significant. It's just a delay. Well, that would be you believing that Trump is actually going to hold this timetable and not just delay it again.
The problem is that when you make it sound like that you're making it sound like this is a dramatic departure from previous EPA
okay, hold on.
rulings.
Somebody is in my chat just said they did remove the regulation entirely this year.
Okay.
So
well,
and the reason why that took place.
Wait, well, hold on, because now I got to read this article too, because I got to make sure that these are being
presented. Oh God damn it! I
gotta piss again. The last one really wasn't.
What? It was a significant thing. It was.
No, because the title was that they rolled something back,
they did,
which makes it sound like when you say like there's a rollback like that, it makes it sound like you're getting rid of something entirely, and that wasn't what was going on.
All right, hold on.
So
all right, I gotta piss.
Okay, go for it.
I've been drinking too much water to talk.
I hope you guys in Mike's chat are getting triggered. You guys look like some of the dumbest small brain motherfuckers I've ever seen.
I want to debate you on MMT,
you guys are mad as fuck.
Motherfucking son of a bitch. I'll debate you on MMT right now.
You made me on what?
Magic money trees. Let's go.
I don't do magic money tree shit. That's some fucking AIDS ass shit. But listen, if you like it,
it's a descriptive claims, and I think as someone who prides that kind of shit, I mean, maybe you're interested.
I'm good. I would rather do Nazi historical revisionism than magic money tree shit. I'm sorry. I love you though. Okay.
I will say the coal ash regulation is not the only one. There have been multiple Obama-era regulations, environmental regulations that the EPA has pulled back that are very bad.
Who's talking?
Sorry.
Quiet.
All right.
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't expect it to slightly change. The only issue that I'm taking is that like it's not like the EPA was this shining beacon of environmental protections under Obama and then Trump undid it. The thing is that any regulation the EPA pushes is probably like tenuously held at best because half of Congress isn't even on board with that. Well, fuck, prior to the prior elections, both houses of Congress probably wouldn't have been for any EPA shit, right? So if anything, right, like it speaks to the strength of these institutions that they were able to.
Okay, yeah, no. I hear what you're saying. Like, first of all, I thank God that these institutions do have some continuity, and we do have laws like that empower the EPA and put a lot of decision-making authority in the hands of experts, right?
Sure.
But the point is that they're using all of their discretionary authority as political appointees to block the efforts of the scientists. That's what they're doing. And like, there's another example. Didn't they just do a thing this past week about the Endangered Species Act?
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Fuck, I can't. All these articles are paid.
I know. I'm sorry, dude. Listen, like, so the thing is with me, like, I have a lot of, and how do I say this? I have a lot of my own experiences, right? Okay, so the Species Act Endangered. This is the New York Times. This is an opinion piece. But it's from the New York Times, so I don't think that you would say that they're biased in my populist left favor, right?
Sure.
But they're talking about how the Interior Department announced a set of rules on Monday that, far from enlarging protections, will weaken how the nation's most important conservation law, the Endangered Species Act, is applied. So this is an example of Trump using these appointees to do this. Did you know that Obama tried to regulate carbon through the EPA, through the Clean Air Act?
Was that for the cap and trade shit that he tried to do?
Okay, let me pull this up. Obama. He was overturned by the Republicans on the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision.
Oh wait, okay, wait. Also, just real quick, the point that I'm trying to get across is that like if 0 is like extremely liberal and 100 is extremely conservative, when you say like Trump is appointing people that are destroying these institutions that are making them change, it sounds like they're going from like a 5 to like a 95. When in reality, what I'm saying is it sounds like what an appointee is doing is they're moving it from like a 48 to like a 55 or a 58.
I would say,
yeah, an appointee can make it worse, but that's because the institution was already like borderline. It's not like this institution was like doing all these amazing environmental things and then Trump destroyed it all and stopped it all in its tracks. That's essentially what I'm saying.
Well, basically that's thank you guys all for following and joining me. Well, what I'm saying is, listen, dude, obviously he can't get rid of the EPA and all the underlying laws until they repeal the EPA law, which they don't have the votes to do. But what he can do is he can use all elements of discretion and pressure to
influence in some way, which you would expect them to be able to do, right?
Right. To frustrate the EPA's policies and the people he's putting in. Do you agree that they're compromised and they're corrupt, and that Bernie would not appoint a coal lobbyist to head the EPA?
I mean, I certainly disagree with Trump's appointments. Sure, of course.
But do you think they have an effect?
A slight one, yeah. I'm
slight?
Sure they do.
They have an extreme effect.
Some effect. I don't know how extreme the effect is. I mean, I would expect the direction of the EPA to be slightly more right-leaning. I mean, as it should be, right? You agree that the EPA should be slightly more right-leaning if Republicans have won every sector of the government. That it makes sense for that to happen as well, right?
I mean, from a pure democratic principle, sure. But from the point of view of like, what do I think ought to... are you saying I respect am I a liberal in the sense of respecting democracy? Yes.
Sure.
If people vote against their interest and they try to, but on the other hand, like Trump didn't really win from a democratic point of view. He won because of the Electoral College and the ridiculous system we have, and I don't think he has any legitimacy.
Okay, sure, but Republicans didn't control both halves of Congress just because of the Electoral College, right?
They also gerrymandered, and also do you recognize that gerrymandering is extremely significant or no?
Yeah.
I mean, like, the Democrats won the largest popular vote victory in 2018 ever, and we're nowhere near like the largest margin of control. We had the highest turnout like in our midterm election in 2018 of like the modern era after World War I. So like the fact that we control the House is due to the fact that we're winning a ton of districts that were gerrymandered for Republicans. And so, and the Senate, we all know how unrepresentative that is, and that North Dakota has the same amount of senators as California, and that's ridiculously undemocratic, right? Do we agree on that? Or do you like
that? That what?
That California having the same amount of senators as North Dakota is ridiculous and anti-democratic?
Not really, no.
You don't agree with that?
No.
What? You like the Senate? Oh my God, why?
Because it's important to keep every state invested in the union, right? Otherwise people would just completely ignore the flyover states entirely.
They're not ignoring them entirely. They're just proportional to their population.
The proportion would be almost 0.
It wouldn't be 0.
How many people live in like Montana?
Why is that? Okay, well, here's I mean, we're going back into history, but like when we admitted all those states, was it done in a nonpartisan way, or was that for the partisan advantage of a party?
Well, I don't know the founding of every single state, whether or not if every single state being inducted was done in a partisan or nonpartisan manner. But I don't think that's relevant to the question today.
It is relevant, because if it was the political advantage of one party, then it doesn't have any democratic... Do
you think it's relevant that Democrats were the ones pushing against civil rights in the 60s and Republicans were the ones supporting them?
Well, that's not the case.
Why is it not relevant here?
First of all, that's
going back to like the foundation of some political principles. So there's not really relevant to how it's applied today, right?
First of all, Democrats voted for the Civil Rights Act, and there was a Democratic president that signed it.
Sure, but Democrats were generally the ones that pushed against it, and Republicans were generally the ones in favor of it back in the early 60s.
No. Yes. Politicians from the South pushed against it, and politicians from the North.
Who in that time were Democrats,
not all.
Politicians from the North. Generally, they were, yeah. It was generally
Democrats had an overwhelming majority in both the House and Senate. That's the thing. Is like the time you're talking about Like we could.
Okay, hold on. We can just research this one specifically, and
sure.
I'll come back in a day. Because I've done this dance a million times with Republicans. I don't know why you wouldn't just admit this. Because
I would say that Dixiecrats.
Because the obvious answer that you give is we don't define political parties by what they believe 50 or 60 years ago. When Republicans today say the Democrats in the 60s did support, abolishing civil rights, whatnot, that's just factually
Dixiecrats
true. But the caveat, the caveat is that political party positions have evolved in that time, right? That Republicans aren't the same. That if you look at the distribution between Republicans and Democrats from the north and the south, these are so I don't know why you're pushing back on this claim.
Well,
unless you literally feel like if you give an inch anywhere that it's going to make your whole narrative.
I'm not pushing it. I'm trying to make sure what we say is accurate, which is
sure. So Republicans generally back then were the ones that were in favor of civil rights, and Democrats were generally the party that was opposing it. Do you disagree with that, or do you agree with that?
I would say that most of the opposition to the civil rights movement was in the Democratic Party. But as a whole,
would you agree
the
that
Democratic Party supported the Civil Rights Act as a whole?
Would you say that the Republican Party, was as a percentage of the Republican parties, typically supported or were against the Civil Rights Act more?
I would say the Republican Party that had political power in the South voted against it, and the Republicans that were in the North, largely with their Democratic colleagues, supported it. That's what I would say. And I would say that Dixiecrats migrated from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party after the deployment of the Southern Strategy.
Yeah, they did. Southern Strategy is a big part of it because the political positions changed over time, of course.
And LBJ himself used to be a Dixiecrat, and then he changed to support the Civil Rights Act.
And the political parties changed their positions more or less, right? And you can go and look. Someone in chat linked a distribution of the parties in back in the 60s, and you can see even if they were Democrats, it's pretty clear where the political interests aligned at the time, and the parties are more likely to have shifted than every single American moved from one state to the other.
By the way, if you look at that 60 election, which was linked by For Everything, you see Democrats doing well in the South, but also they won Pennsylvania, they won New York, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Michigan. So you had some Dixiecrats, and then there was lots of segregationists voting for Byrd, right? And they won Alabama and Mississippi. And so you have a complicated tapestry. The country was in transition, the parties were in transition, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that in your thing. I'm just saying that we wouldn't go back and say 100 years ago, how were states let's just talk about whether or not proportionality is important right now in the Senate. We don't have to see how a state was inducted into the Union to figure out if the Senate is a good idea. It's totally irrelevant. It has no bearing whatsoever in the conversation.
Well, it does in the sense that would you support the induction of DC, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam as states?
No, I wouldn't support the induction of anything because the lands were probably stolen from natives who were genocided by us when we came here. So that whole argument is worthless. So can we just focus on modern day politics or
I am. You're asking me, well, the reason why we got off on this tangent is you just asked me about the Senate. And then I said, I don't think the Senate has any democratic legitimacy and I don't really care about it. And if I had the ability to pass an amendment to get rid of it, I would.
Okay, then what do you do with the fact that nobody would give a fuck about states like Iowa or Montana or Nebraska or Kansas?
They would care.
Why would they?
Because they have representatives and they have some population.
Barely, though.
And they would care.
The vast majority of the attention would be spent in states that are important, just like what happens in election cycles because of the electoral college.
Actually, the electoral college makes it even dumber because instead of spending time in states proportion to their population, which they don't do, they spend the time in states that have the closest elections. So they spend them in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, not because Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are the biggest, but because those are the states that are closest to swinging from one election to the other. I would love for presidents to campaign in California. I would love for presidents to campaign in Texas. I would love.
Do you think that during election seasons, do you?
They don't. By the way, they don't visit those states anyway. They're all safe red seats. What do you mean?
Sure. Do you think that they should spend 95% of their time campaigning in California, Texas?
They wouldn't. They would campaign everywhere. They would campaign in proportion to the population.
Every minute that you spend campaigning in Iowa or something, it could be 1 million votes that you've lost in California or Texas or Florida.
If anything, it would encourage a 50-state strategy to maximize your voters no matter where they are, because you're trying to win a popular vote, as opposed to focusing on these very close purple states.
If one guy spent 90% of his time in 45 states, and another guy spent 90% of his time in in what it would be Texas, Florida, California. What are 4 and 5? I know that those are
It's California, Texas, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania.
New York would be the next one. Yeah,
it's California, New York. It's California, Texas, New York, something like that.
Yeah, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia. Yeah. Sure. If people would only campaign in these hugely populous states. Because the amount of time that you lose not campaigning there by appealing to these small flyover states would just be a waste of time.
I mean, that's okay. You're making it an electoral claim, and as someone who's worked in electoral politics, that's not necessarily true. Like, if you have an area that's 100% safe for you, and you know they're going to turn out well, you're not going to spend your time campaigning there. You're going to spend your time campaigning where there's a delta to be gained, namely either turning out people who weren't going to turn out or changing somebody's mind. And right now, you incentivize the focus on the electorally college swing states. Not even the small states. Like, the Electoral College doesn't really enhance the attention paid to these small states. Most of them are safe red, so the Republicans spend almost no time campaigning in North Dakota, South Dakota, Michigan, or Montana, Idaho. They don't spend their time there because they're safe.
Why do you think? Why are those seats safe?
Because they vote for the Republican Party by a large margin. It's sort of like why the Democrats don't spend their time in California.
Kind of. So the problem isn't necessarily the Electoral College. The problem is that every single vote, except for in Maine and Nebraska, goes towards somebody that is not divvied up based on the population, right? This is a problem.
You're making my point, Steve. Because I'll explain how. So right now they don't campaign in Nebraska, but well, actually they might because there's that Electoral College. Okay, let's get it a different state. They don't campaign in Washington State because it's a safe blue state.
Sure.
If you did an electoral college and there's a Republican Party stronghold in Washington State, which there is in the eastern part of the state, you might go out there and campaign and do a rally and say, I care about you, Eastern Washington people. You're going to get representation in Washington. I need you to come out. You send out organizers there. You try to turn out every vote in Eastern Washington, whereas if the old system, you wouldn't. And the same thing happens for every other state. Democrats will go to Texas, where previously they wouldn't because it was a safe red state. And they'll go into Austin and try to turn out people in Austin. And they'll have a message.
Why couldn't you achieve the same thing by just making it so that the Electoral College votes were proportionally split like they are in Nebraska and Maine?
Because you would still have a malapportionment effect due to the fact that the Electoral College does not represent where the population is distributed. So you could still have an outcome where people win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College. So why even bother with the Electoral College? I don't even see the point.
I don't know. I don't know. I guess we would have to see
I think Nebraska would probably be enhanced.
I have like a really hard time believing that anybody would spend any time campaigning in these
small,
sub 2 million
Do
population
you not
states.
agree with my premise that if you have?
I don't think so. I feel like there's too big of an opportunity cost. So like if there was like proportional votes in the Electoral College and I was a Republican, I think I'd have a higher chance of going to like rural California because I know I could win over a lot of voters there as opposed to ever wasting my time.
But that would be great because that would mean a politician was actually going to rural California, which is normally ignored like it is now. And by the way,
that's not because of the Electoral College as a whole. That's because the votes aren't split proportionally.
I don't know how we got off of this track, but we're gonna do it. Yeah. Let's assume that every single person but one person moves to California. So 49 states have one person living in them, and everybody lives in California. Do you think it makes sense that all those people should have 48 senators? Each person has 2 senators, right? And California only has 2? Does that make sense?
I think for that extreme of a thing, probably not.
How is that not what we already have with California compared to, say, Wyoming? Go look at the ratios.
Do you live in California?
No, I live in Pennsylvania. I'm Mike from PA.
Oh, okay.
And my state is the premium target. We get way more attention because we are a swing state, not because of our population size or any other reason. It's just that we're close. By happenstance, half the people in Pennsylvania are Republicans and half the people are Democrats. So everyone spends all their time focusing on Pennsylvania, and to the detriment of Nebraska, to the detriment of rural California, to the detriment of Austin, Texas, to the detriment of all these states. And all I'm arguing for is...
you're restating the same thing over and over again. I don't disagree right now that because votes are given 100%, right, because it's a winner-take-all scenario, which is dumb as fuck, that incentivizes a huge problem. But I don't know. I feel like I have a really hard time. But why would you ever go and campaign in Wyoming if you could go to a rural part of Texas or Florida or California and you know there are so many more people?
But that's better than what we have now. Even then. Even if you don't
think that there would ever be a problem? You don't think you would ever run into issues where states would feel like they don't matter? Where even though you have a 50-state union...
We're already in that state.
How?
Because people, do you know all the people who voted Jill Stein and shit in California and New York? And they're like, well, my vote doesn't matter. I'm in California and New York. Or a lot of people don't even show up. And there are purple areas in New York and California, and they think, well, my vote doesn't matter. I live in California. So they don't show up to the polls on election day, and they don't vote down ballot. And so they don't actually get the representation they should get at lower level.
Yeah, but aren't
offices.
those issues there that those are like incredibly entrenched districts anyway? Like, wouldn't that be the same no matter what? Like, if I'm in California, like my vote probably never matters because the Democrat is going to win. I'm in LA County anyway, right? Isn't that more an issue of like the people around me are all sharing my opinion more than anything else? Whereas if I was in like a battleground state, it'd be different.
Well, my point was, and I don't know if I was very articulate, is even in safe states, there are battleground areas where there are congressional seats that are purple and they're close. And you disincentivize people to participate because, frankly, and you know this is true, people pay attention to the top of the ticket in the presidential race more than they care about all the other races. And there is a certain percentage of people that are discouraged from participating that might otherwise participate if they felt like their vote mattered for the president. And I feel like what we have with the Electoral College, and like I understand what you're saying, that there's an interest in these smaller states and we don't want them to be overawed, but doesn't it make no sense to let little states rule over big states just because they have large states through happenstance? They all agree. Like, I mean, I think it kind of does. Like if you have like 10 people at like a table and you're trying to make decisions about what to do about things, and one guy like represents like a lot more than the other 9 people, to keep everybody incentivized into like this decision-making process, you would want to give a little bit more autonomy to the 9 smaller guys as opposed to the one huge dude at the table. Yeah, I think you would. But it's the difference is we're not doing that. What we're doing is we're allowing the 9 guys that represent less than the one guy to tell him what to do in his territory. And that is
because we're part of a federal body, sure.
Well, but
I mean, like, don't you think the House kind of balances this out a little bit? That like, well, in the House you've got former representation.
Well, how do we pass laws? I hate to ask this, but how do we pass laws?
Legislation is proposed, and I'm pretty sure it can come from either the House or the Senate. It has to pass through both of them, and then it's signed by the president.
So the House can pass all the like what's happening right now? They're passing legislation after bill after bill after bill, and it goes right to the Senate and dies.
Mm-hmm.
How is that a good alternative? That's not a good policy. We would have a climate change policy. We'd have a minimum wage increase. We would have a electoral reform. We would have a million things that you and I agree are very important, but they're dying because Mitch McConnell and the anti-democratic Senate are there to block it.
This is kind of true, but there's also a back and forth that happens between the Senate and the House as well. If you do have like so many people in the House, right? But when it comes time to negotiate bills and it comes time to rally votes together, you've got like much stronger negotiating positions in the House. If you know that you can make like certain concessions because you have like enough votes that you can get, that you can demand like a little bit of a harder thing that goes, I guess, like before the Senate for like negotiations or whatnot. No,
okay. So I think my main disagreement with you is I believe that the system should be more democratically responsive, and that people should be represented and not land. And you believe that there is some sort of culturally significant thing about the difference between North and South Dakota. And a North Dakotan has significantly different interests than a South Dakotan. And I think that's laughably untrue on its face, and that those states should be combined into a state.
I think that some states do have dramatically different interests. Like I think that, for instance, like northern or central states, these states might be we can give like an issue. These states might be anti-immigration, right? But maybe southern states are more pro-immigration because it helps their economies or something, right? Something like this, right? Is it fair that like because the southern states are larger that they can dictate all of the policy to the smaller states in the north and now feel like they don't have a voice in the union because everything is done proportionally?
If you're asking me, should the democratic will rule? My answer is yes.
What about everybody memes at this now, and I don't know if people just don't care about it anymore or whatever. Do you not think that there's like a problem if like a majority of people are willing something to a minority of people that can't like resist it, that they just have to take it because it's a majority rule thing?
Okay, so this is actually a really important question philosophically, like in political. Have you read a lot of political philosophy? I think you would like it, actually.
Nope, fuck no. Whatever's in the Wikipedias, that's all I read.
Well,
holy shit.
Oh, great. Well, this would be some of the stuff. Would be really good.
Hit me up. Like, it's about a little bit more than the average lefty reads, believe it or not. But hit me up. You sound like you read a lot, so hit me up with whatever it is you got. Go for it.
So the principle of like minority rights and majority rule, is basically what you're arguing. And I do think that there should be certain areas of government that are fenced off and have a higher level of protection from the whims of the majority. Sort of.
Sure, like protected classes, right?
So like. Not just protected classes, but like, you can't regulate my speech. Like Trump can't pass a law saying that I am not able to advocate for an organization that wants to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. Oh, wait, never mind. Back that up a second. Let's think of another example. I don't know, like the right of interracial marriage, right? Like in Virginia, it used to be illegal for black and white people to get married until a case in the Supreme Court called Loving v. Virginia, where typically family law is left to the provision of the states. and the federal government does not participate in family law. So that's stuff like marriages and child support and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the Supreme Court intervened and said that it was a violation of the equal protection of the laws for Virginia to say that interracial couples are illegal. And so that is an example of the majority rule. And by the way, if you're using majority in the sense of like the sovereign state government, they had passed a law, and we had overrode that majority's opinion in the favor of civil and legal rights and equal protection. So I'm okay with fencing off certain rights from that require a much higher consensus in order to impede upon than just a strict majority. I think.
How do you decide which rights those are, though? Isn't that a pretty hard?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, like immigration is like a hot button topic that people don't.
It's tough. It's a tough one, and some states don't even have a constitution that's written, and they just kind of have an unwritten constitution and they deal with it. And sometimes, a lot of countries in Europe, it's mostly okay. In the United States, we have a Bill of Rights, and we have judicial review at the Supreme Court, and we have a very contentious way of doing it. In France, they have a constitutional court that just focuses on those kind of questions. I mean, like, there's different ways of doing it. And exactly what fits in there, is difficult to say, but it's something that we as a society. I mean, I'm not God. If you're making me God Kingmaker, I could come up with a whole list of shit, and I think it would make America a lot better. But that's probably not the best way. I think making Mike from PA God King of America would probably enhance it quite a bit. But that's my arrogance speaking. I don't know. Like, the answer is whatever we as a society come to a consensus to, right? I hate to give you a wiggly answer, but
not really, right? The whole goal is that, well, I guess like we would have to come to a consensus about things that we don't have to come to a consensus about, right? That's like the
right.
That's the
like,
paradox.
Do you like the Bill of Rights as an example? Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
Like, do I agree with all 10 amendments, or do you think I think the concept of it is kind of bad, but for weird reasons, or what do you mean?
Like, so we have the First Amendment, which prohibits the establishment of a religion, abridgment of the press, freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Like, are those principles something that should we allow the government to regulate speech, religion?
No.
Okay.
I like, my main opposition to the Bill of Rights is, and I don't even know how much these positions are defended or cared about anymore, but the Bill of Rights always seemed strange to me because the entire idea behind the federal government was that, like, if the entire idea behind the federal government was like, if a power wasn't specifically delegated to the federal government, then it would be left to the states to decide. But it seems like the Bill of Rights kind of set a precedent of, like, the government can kind of do things unless it says it can't, which put us in a weird area in a lot of ways.
Okay, you're talking about the distinction between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and
sure,
yeah, and like
I don't know if those arguments have been resolved. That's like the strongest argument I ever heard against, like, the Bill of Rights. Generally, everything in the Bill of Rights, I'm pretty sure I agree with.
I tend to
some of, like, the gun stuff.
I tend to believe that the federal government is the source of, like, sovereignty and should have more expansive powers than strictly reading the Constitution. I mean, obviously, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have a modern state. We're kind of getting a field. Of course. We're getting a field.
Well, yeah, the Supreme Court obviously expanded its powers greatly, and then
right, and it also expanded the federal government's powers, and this happened during the court packing scandal, and then FDR. Well, that wasn't really a scandal, but FDR was basically, we were facing the Great Depression. This is basic history, everybody, and then the Supreme Court kept overturning all the policies that FDR would pass in order to alleviate the Great Depression, and it was creating an emergency because we had an economic, a quarter of the people were unemployed. We had massive problems in the country, and the Supreme Court was blocking the democratically elected branches of government from ameliorating those problems. And so FDR said, well, I'm going to add more judges until we get a Supreme Court that's going to uphold the democratic will of the people. And then they kind of balked, and they started, they endorsed his theories of the Constitution, like the expansive reading of the Commerce Clause, etc., and Wickard v. Filburn. And so, but the point of raising the Bill of Rights is we have a certain, and we have these amendments where we have fenced off the government from operating in here, and we have a constitutional court and the Supreme Court which defends the bounds of this, like, super consensus territory, like the establishment of religion. You can't do it because it's in the Bill of Rights. If you pass a law if a democratically elected government passes a law establishing a religion, it will be overturned by the Supreme Court. And I tend to think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, probably.
But
compared to what was laid out originally in the founding documents for the government, doesn't probably give it enough power to do what we needed to do today, right?
And well, I mean, again, I guess it depends on how you understand language to work and like concepts of law and.
Sure, or unless you're a libertarian or a conservative that thinks the government should be minimized as much as possible, some dumb shit.
Yeah. I think.
Okay. I love you. I need to sleep. It's so fucking late to me. Go. Give me your final man.
Here's what I will say, is that I don't think it's dangerous for us to describe the hollowing out of our institutions by somebody like Donald Trump and his corrupt appointees. And I think it's actually important for everybody to understand that, yes, we're putting a coal lobbyist in the EPA, and he's repealing regulations on coal, not based on the science, but because he values the profits of coal companies over your health and the future of this country. And I don't think that that's dangerous to say that the EPA has been compromised like that, because the solution that progressives like me, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders have is to put scientists and technocrats back in charge of organizations like the EPA to free them from corrupt lobbyist influence and put the science first. And so I don't think it's dangerous to point out the corruption that the Republican Party is putting in.
Sure thing. If you want to go full technocracy, listen, those are memes that I'm considering, okay?
Well, that's just communism, by the way. The Soviet Union was an attempt to make economics scientific. Like, you know that, right? Did you know that?
The Soviet Union had some
the Soviet Union was a technocracy.
Pretty sure they killed a lot of scientists that didn't agree with their scientific
research. Oh, no. Of course, the politicians fucked up, but that was they were scientific socialism. That's what they were arguing for.
Sure, of course, yeah. I mean, everybody wants to push their own science.
Right?
That's literally everybody, right? But
and that's the problem of decoupling democratic control from just like scientists, because they're bound by all sorts of like problems as well. So we should do both. And honestly, the societies that have good, robust democracies, like the Nordic countries, they also have good governance because they're responsive to the needs of the people. And I'm just arguing that we should move more towards that Northern European model. And then
that's what I do, because I'm a sock down.
Do you though?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. All of my policy positions 100 line up.
So
the problem is that most people that call themselves sock dems today, though, are like fucking tankies in disguise or some shit.
I'm not.
Like,
do you think I'm a tanky in disguise? Do you think I'm a tanky in disguise? Really?
I'm not sure. I'm on the fence. But like, if you're a sock dem and you're constantly saying that we need to be socialist, you're not a sock dem. You're either a dem sock or you're probably 80% of the time you're a tanky if you're on fucking Twitter these days. But they just pretend not to be for some reason.
Well, I think if you look at what I'm saying and the conversations we've had, they have been total. Oh, by the way. Before the stream, someone showed me a clip on your stream of you saying that all sock dems are democratic socialists are really tankies, and if you went in the room, you would find Soviet Union stuff. And I went to my room and I found something that I own because it's a memory for me, and that is my union organizing shirt for the Painters and Allied Trades, the Hard Hats for Hillary shirt. Now, would a fucking tanky retain his bullshit hard hats for Hillary? Because what I did in the general election of 2016 was try to help Hillary Clinton, the fucking hapless centrist, win. Because I realized
I don't think so. Which is good. That's why I said I'm on the fence. By you.
How can you be on the fence?
You got a lot of tanky iconography in your fucking Twitch page, and I don't trust any of you lefty motherfuckers anymore. Okay, that's why.
First of all, before you go, there is nothing wrong with red. Red predates communism. Socialism and like labor, like that's the color of the Labour Party of the UK, the ultimate sock dem party. It is not communist. Relax, my dude. like I have roses and shit. That's socialism. That's democratic socialism.
And the font, that's just like a coincidence, I guess. Or...
The font is a beautiful font. I like the design. What do you want from me? What font is it, Destiny? What font is it? Find the font. Tell me which font.
I think it's like isn't it called Times New Soviet Union or something?
No, it's not the Times. So Destiny Red Scare. I agree 100%. I love you.
Listen,
get some rest.
You know what they say. Cut a sock dem and a tanky bleeds. All right.
You said you were a sock dem.
I love you. Have fun, buddy. Good night.
Love you. Bye bye.
What? Oh,
you can stay if you want. More people want to talk.
Well, no, I gotta fucking sleep soon.
Yeah. I should go to bed too, but I got all energized.